This event happened to me and a group of friends in the summer of 2013 in Virginia. It's been a story I've told a lot of friends and classmates, but left out a very personal detail. This is the first time I'm sharing that detail. In high school, everyone was always looking for places to drink. That was the question every weekend, practically. Where are we going to drink tonight? Once we found a spot where we could drink freely with limited chance of being arrested, we went there every weekend until we got bored. That sounds terrible, I know, but come on. We lived in an extremely boring, white, middle-class, gated community-ridden town. Drinking was a fun way to almost rebel against our parents and get away from the continuity of life there. So my family and I moved here to Virginia from the Midwest. And we did a lot of outdoorsy things when we lived in the Midwest. And once the move to Virginia happened, my dad ended up getting really sick, which prevented him from being outside for long periods of time. Camping was always something my family and I used to do when I was little. And now being a senior in high school, I remember how much beer my parents could drink without being disturbed. It was perfect. Get a bunch of buddies together, buy a few cases of beer, go out into the woods and camp for a weekend, and get plastered for my birthday. So we did our research and found a nice-looking place about 40 minutes away. So we packed the cars full with food and gear, and of course beer. When we got to the campsite, the place was packed with campers and tents. We could hardly find a spot. The only space that was open was Site No. 2, which was right by the registration office. Fuck, they will definitely be able to see us drinking. But we noticed that everyone in the office left at like 5 p.m. and didn't come back until like 11 p.m. the next day. So we unpacked our stuff and camped for a weekend, and it was great. The weather was absolutely perfect. We never ran out of beer. We got to go swimming the lake, we got sun, and we got away with it. So then, of course, we go back to our cookie-cutter neighborhood and tell all our friends how great it was. And the only question we had left was, when are we gonna go next? So later that very same summer, we planned out another camping trip. This is where it got very strange. So we got like half of the original group to come again, as well as 2 very attractive girls who signed on to go with us. We were, of course, going to go back to the same place we went to last time, when we had such a fun time. So we did the 40-minute drive back to the campground, and I noticed it felt different on the drive-in. I attributed it to the cloudy-covered sky, but something felt very different. We arrived at the campground together, and the first I noticed was that there was nobody there. No tents or campers anywhere, except for one. There was also nobody in the registration office, which I thought was strange for 3 p.m. on a Friday at the end of July. I just remember thinking, I should be weirded out by the fact that there is nobody here right now, but nobody else seems to be noticing, so it might just be me. But something's not right. It was like everybody else knew something that we didn't. The one other camper there didn't have anybody in it. We were there for 3 days straight, and we didn't see a single person come in or out of the camper the whole time, nor did we see anything on their surroundings moved around. The whole weekend ended up being weird. The weather was rainy and humid, so we spent a lot of time in the tent, just roasting and drinking beer. We were sitting in the tent when one of the girls says, "Is there someone walking on our site right now?" So I poked my head out of the tent, and there was a state ranger parked at our site looking at me, not 3 feet away from the tent opening. I immediately freaked out, because we had been drinking in the tent, so I said, "Hi sir, how can I help you?" And all he said back was, "Don't forget to pay your camping fees." Then he stood there for like a minute just staring at me. He gave a small chuckle before backing up to his truck and getting in and driving away in the direction of the empty camper. I went back and told the story with relief, because we got away with drinking, but something didn't feel right about that. But that's not the detail. That comes into play that night. We were sitting around the campfire, drinking beer and telling funny stories. Earlier in the day, one of our friends, Mitch, went to go get more beer since we ran out. The only problem was he left at 3 p.m. and still wasn't back at 12 a.m., so I was slightly freaking out. The culmination of all the weird things deterred me from drinking any beer that night, so I could stay clear-headed in case anything weird happened. Boy, am I glad I made that decision. So we're all sitting around the campfire telling stories, when I notice a car drive up. Thinking it's Mitch, I jump up to see. But it's just a brown, rusty-looking truck, and it pulls into sight no lone, which is a stone's throw away from us. It should have made me feel comfortable to know we're not alone out here in the woods, but it didn't. It made me paranoid, specifically for 2 reasons. 1, it was 12:30 a.m. There was no reason he should be here at this time if he was just going camping. 2, he didn't have any tents or camping equipment in the back. All he had was a blue tarp covering a half-full bed. So I stay aware, but calm as to not freak out my group of friends. But I noticed him setting up a floodlight and a wooden bench, but that's all I could see because he parked his truck on the far side of the campsite to block view from us. I talked myself down by saying, just calm down. You're being paranoid. It's probably just something you don't want to get involved with. So I turned my full focus to my friends and even started drinking some beer. About an hour later, I made my worries about Mitch known to everyone, and they all calmed me down. But as I was agreeing with them, I looked up and saw a man walking onto our site. But I only caught him in the light of the campfire, so he was on top of us before I could even react. The man said, in a thick Eastern European accent, "Hello, I am the park ranger for this park, and I just wanted to offer you 2 complimentary pieces of wood for your fire. You know, you're not allowed to bring your own wood here, because it can have bugs on it. Enjoy and have a good night." We waited until he was out of earshot before giving it the "what in the fucking hell was that?" "We're outside. Don't bugs live out here?" Why would it matter? But I noticed when he put the wood down next to our fire, there was a part of him that didn't bend when he did. Once he was walking away, and I saw it swinging from his belt loop, did I know he was carrying a large machete. Mitch still wasn't back at 2 a.m., and I was afraid for his life. So I asked my close friend Mop to ride with me to go find him. It was a one-road drive, so he had to be on it no matter what. I was also going to voice my terrors and concerns with him in the car to see if he felt the same things I did. We were driving down the road looking for either a crashed car or Mitch heading in the opposite direction. As soon as I opened my mouth to ask if Mop was freaking out too, we saw Mitch speed past us, which was a huge relief to me. I whipped a quick U and started following him back to the site. Once we were all back, we told Mitch the story of the strange wood guy and how we thought he had died. But he had brought the beer, and we all started drinking once he was back. I began to notice a pounding sound coming from site no lone that sounded a lot like he was chopping wood. Yeah, that makes sense. He's the park ranger, and he is chopping wood for them to sell. And he gave us 2 complimentary pieces. That makes sense. Until we ran out of wood, and they asked me to go steal some more. Nothing made sense about that. We brought bundles of wood, enough to last us through this night, and it was gone. So I guess I had to go steal some wood. Now the wood tower was in between Site No Own and Site No Own, but it was closer to Site No Own. I snuck from our campsite through the woods towards the wood tower. I was drunk at this point, and was not scared of the mysterious wood chopper. So I get to the wood tower and begin sliding pieces of wood into my arms, The more I get, the less times I have to come and steal more. So I grab about 8 big pieces and start sneaking back, but not before throwing a glance in the direction of Site No Own, where the chopping sound continued. My eyes focus on the wooden bench where I saw the park ranger chopping, with his machete, a human leg. I saw him plummet the large knife into the thigh, and it cut in about halfway before he raised it again and slammed it back into the same spot, severing it from the rest of the leg. I closed my eyes and froze. I immediately started tearing up and felt like I was going to puke. It felt like I was standing there for hours, there in the dark with my arms shaking from holding the heavy wood and my eyes watering from the trauma that unfolded in front of me. I pulled my legs out of their frozen state and slunked back to our site. I dropped the wood down and just sat down. I didn't know what to do. I could have said something, and we could have gone home and gotten in trouble, but I would have known everyone would be okay. Or I could keep quiet and not freak everyone out. When I got back, the jokes about the wood guy were spewing out, and everyone was laughing, but it was as if someone had turned my hearing aid down, and I was just listening to cotton. I told myself it wasn't a leg, it was a log. It had to have been a log. This doesn't happen to people like you. It's a log. So after some time we burned up the 8 logs I brought back, and I just went into the tent and laid in bed. Everyone followed. It's a log, remember. It was just a log. I woke up the next day to a beautiful hot summer day. I looked over and all my friends were alive and well, sleeping and waking up next to me. That was one of the best feelings I've had. Knowing that the night of worrying was for nothing. But I couldn't help but remember an extremely realistic dream of the wood guy peering into our tent from the screen window on the side. I made eye contact with him and shook my head no, and he slowly walked away. But just a dream, I guess. I was camping in Arizona with my cousin. We built a fire, then got some marshmallows out to make some s'mores. It was a warm night, but we were having a good time. I hadn't gone camping with my cousin in years, since we were teenagers. I blew the flame out on my marshmallow and crushed it between 2 graham crackers and chocolate. Do you want to hear a scaly story? My cousin asked with a sly grin on his face. When we were younger, he used to always tell scary stories around the fire. I couldn't help but get excited. Let's see if you still got it, I said with my own grin. Have you ever heard of a skinwalker? He asked, popping a marshmallow in his mouth. Yeah, isn't it a native legend? Something about turning into a coyote. Yes, a skinwalker is a Navajo witch that wears the skins of animals and can turn into any animal they want. He leans in closer so the fire illuminates his face. What's so scaly about that? I ask. You don't want to run into one of them. Trust me, I have. I say nothing, waiting for him to continue on with the story. I was visiting my friend on the res one day the summer after graduation. We were hanging out on the porch, talking about what we were going to do now that school was over. Just wasting the night away, Then I noticed a coyote just wandering around a few yards away. Now in this neighborhood there weren't any fences dividing the yards, so I could see it walk from yard to yard. I nudged my friend and nodded over to it. We got quiet and just watched it. Then it stood up on 2 feet. It was pressed up against a house in the shadows and just scooted along on 2 feet like a human. I was so shocked. I didn't think coyotes could do that. My friend whispered to me, "That's no coyote." I asked him what he meant. That's a skinwalker. Now he had mentioned skinwalkers to me before, but I thought it was just a legend, and that he surely didn't believe some old story his parents told him to scare him from playing in the woods at night. Once it was next to a garbage can, it hopped on top of it, then leaped up grabbing onto the window ledge. The window was open. Fear filled my body as I realized two things. No coyote could do that. And whoever was in that room was about to have a very bad night. Then we heard the guy in that room screaming. Then his screams were drowned out by a scream that was somewhat of a mix of animal and human. We fell out of our chairs scrambling to get inside. We locked all the doors and windows and hid. That was the scariest night of my life. I don't remember if cops showed up to that house. We were too scared to leave the room and check, but it's a night I'll never forget. Goosebumps cover my arms. Now that was a good story. I didn't believe him about it being true, but it was a good story nonetheless. Looks like you still got it. That was good. Got me being scared to look into the trees. I laughed nervously, looking behind me at the forest that seems just a little scarier now. Every word of that is true. I didn't make this one up. No need to make up a scary story when you've lived it. He has a pleased look on his face nonetheless. We sat in silence for a bit, and I thought about the story he just told. For some reason, a coyote creeping around on two legs just seems comical. I laughed to myself. Maybe it would be creepier in person. After another 30 minutes, the fire dies down, and we crawled into our tent. All thoughts of skinwalkers had left our heads. I was drifting off to sleep when a stick snapping outside our tent woke me up. My face was facing the wall of the tent, and I don't think I'd quite registered what woke me up. After a few seconds, I closed my eyes and prepared to go back to sleep. Then I heard my cousin outside the tent calling my name. I opened my eyes. I assumed my cousin had stepped outside for some reason, but I didn't know what he would need me for out there. I didn't quite want to leave my sleeping bag, so I was just gonna pretend like I didn't hear him. I closed my eyes again. Then I heard him call me again. Annoyed, I sat up to leave the tent. That's when I noticed my cousin right next to me, asleep. I knew I heard him call me from outside the tent. I heard it twice. There was no mistake. I shook him awake. "What do you want?" he asked groggily, not opening his eyes. "I heard your voice outside the tent calling my name." Am I going crazy? He opens his eyes, a panicked look in his eyes. "You're absolutely sure?" My voice, he asks. "Yeah, twice. There was no mistaking it." He pulls me down to the ground next to him. We hear some shuffling outside the tent. I start to freak out a little. That's a skinwalker. They can imitate voices. That's how they draw you in, he whispers. "A skinwalker? Are you sure? What's the odds of a skinwalker showing up the same night you tell me the story?" "Don't mess with me," I whisper back. "Talking about a skinwalker at night can draw it to you. I didn't think about that when I told the story. Just stay quiet and stay down, and hopefully it will leave." The sound of another stick snapping didn't help at all. After a few long, frightful hours of laying their eyes wide open, it seemed to go away. Eventually, I fell asleep, I guess. I don't remember falling asleep, and don't know how I could. My cousin was already packing everything up by the time I crawled out of the tent. "I know we planned for 2 more nights, but we're getting out of here right now." "Yeah, I'm with you on that," I said. Now I can't say for sure it was a skinwalker that night, but I can say I definitely heard my cousin calling my name from outside the tent when he was sleeping right next to me. And that was by far the creepiest thing to ever happen to me. So take my advice and save the skinwalker stories for when you're safe in the comforts of home and not for the campfire. It's starting to come back to me. Slowly, bit by bit. I don't know if it was opening up about my grandma's other bedtime story that did it, or the fact my wife finally persuaded me to try counselling. But whatever the reason, the memories are returning. Memories from my childhood, memories of Grandma, memories of the stories she used to tell me before I went to sleep. See, I always knew there were others, other tales that scared me when I was little. But the time before I was a teenager is like a dark landscape. Only a few small patches are lit up. It's getting clearer now, though. The shadows that litter that black land are finally being forced to retreat. The thing is, I'm not sure I want to see what they've been hiding. I must have been around 7 years old when Grandma told me about the special knock. I was tucked up in bed at my parents' first house, in my little room at the back at the time. Grandma was perched by my feet. I'd been crying. I don't know what upset me, but I remember my eyes blurring and my nose running. I remember probing a cut in my lip, touching it over and over again with my tongue. I remember the frown on Grandma's face, a look that was half concern, half something else. After she grabbed a tissue for me and wiped my face, she got up and walked away from the bed, wandered over to the cupboard on the opposite side of my room. I remember that cupboard well. Before we moved to our second home, that cupboard was the source of many sleepless nights for me, many nightmares. I used to imagine all sorts of things about it. I'd lie awake, sometimes for hours, and I'd have to keep peeking my eyes open to check the cupboard door was still closed, to make sure it was shut tight. See, whenever my eyes were closed and I heard a creak somewhere in the house, I'd imagine it was the cupboard door. That something on the far side was trying to open it, ever so softly, so it could come and get me while I slept. I never told anyone about this fear. Even at 7 years old, I knew it was stupid, baby stuff. But as I watched my grandma stop in front of the cupboard and lean her wrinkled cheek against the wood, I felt myself growing tense all the same. Even though the lights were on, even though there was an adult in the room with me. And when Grandma closed her eyes and started whispering, I had to fight back the urge to shout for my parents. Grandma. I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. Grandma, what are you doing? For a few more seconds, she didn't respond, just kept her eyes closed and kept muttering. Then, abruptly, she turned to face me again, smiled, and when she came back and resumed her usual position at the foot of my bed, I knew it was story time. Did I ever tell you about the special knock, sweetheart? I shook my head. No. Well, maybe I was waiting until you were a bit older. The special knock can be wonderful. It can lead you to see things you wouldn't even be able to conjure up in dreams. But it can also be, well, dangerous. Grandma glanced away from me, towards the bedroom door. Maybe it's one for another time, in fact. I really should be getting home to see your grandfather, and I wouldn't want to scare you. She started to get up from the bed, but I stopped her. No, don't go, Grandma. What's the special knock? Grandma's blue eyes twinkled. She hovered where she was for a moment, then sat back down. The special knock is an old trick a friend of mine taught me when I was younger, she began. Not everyone can do it, and not everyone would want to do it. You have to be brave and careful and, well, special. Grandma smiled at me, like you. As I watched her, she reached into the front pocket of her cardigan and pulled out 2 boiled sweets, passed one to me. I'd already brushed my teeth, and I knew Mum would kill me if she caught me eating sweets before bed. But this was my time alone with Grandma. Mum was downstairs with Dad. She'd never know. I unwrapped the sweet and popped it in my mouth, feeling the sticky mint wash over my tongue. The cut in my lip stung slightly, but I ignored it. When Grandma next spoke, she lowered her voice. "When I was over by your cupboard door just now, I was using the magic words. Secret words that only a few other people know. Do you know what those words do?" I shook my head. "They turn a door into a window, a sort of gateway. The thing is, sweetheart, this place you spend your days in, this house where you live, and the building you go to school in, and the town you visit with your mother at the weekends, it's not the only place. There are other places too. And if you use the special knock on that cupboard door of yours, now that I've whispered the magic words to it, you'll see them. You'll be able to see those other places for yourself." I stared at Grandma, concentrating on her words, absorbing them. Mint flooded my mouth, but I forgot to swallow. "Now listen to me very carefully," Grandma continued, "because this is the important bit. The way you open the window is by doing the special knock, but you have to get it right. 7 knocks on the door, that's what you'll want. 7 knocks. No more, no less. Then you open it. You won't be able to step through, but you'll have one heck of a view, all right." I swallowed. A view of what? I don't know its real name, but the woman who taught me the special knock had her own name for it. She called it the lunar plane. 7 knocks takes you to the lunar plane. I could try and describe it to you, sweetheart, but I honestly don't think I could do it justice. You just have to see it for yourself. All I'll say is it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. And trust me, I've seen plenty. Grandma plucked the sweet wrappers up from the duvet, put them back in her pocket. She put her hands on her legs, as if bracing herself to stand. Then she paused. "How many knocks did I say?" 7, Grandma." "That's right, 7. Don't forget it either. If you get the wrong number, and then open the door." She glanced across at the cupboard and frowned. "Well, just make sure you don't get the wrong number, okay?" "Okay, Grandma." "And will you make me a promise?" "What?" "If you do somehow knock the wrong number of times, especially if that number happens to be 13, or something close to it, then whatever you do, don't open the door. Okay? Don't open it, no matter what you hear on the other side. The last thing you want is to open a gateway to the Blacklands." I felt icy fingers down my back. I glanced across at the closed cupboard door, in the shadows at the far end of my bedroom. "What's the Blacklands?" Grandma stood up and wandered over to me, leaned down and gave me a kiss. "You don't want to know," she whispered. I spent the next week avoiding the cupboard. I didn't go anywhere near it. Tried not to even look in its direction. Did my best to push Grandma's story as far out of my mind as I could. It wasn't easy. Whenever I was alone in my room, and the house was silent, I'd feel it. A sort of pull. Like when someone tells you not to look at something, and suddenly all you want to do is take a quick peek. The feeling was sort of like that, but it was different too. Stronger. Sometimes, when I was lying in bed at night, I'd feel the cupboard almost like a weight in my mind. A heavy, static energy. It made me restless. Made me want to scrunch up my fists and grit my teeth. When I turned away from the cupboard, my skin itched. Like the pores had tiny, invisible bugs in them. It made it hard for me to sleep. And when I did sleep, I had dreams. Sometimes the dreams were pleasant, floaty ones. I'd dream I was on a cloud, hovering through multicolored planes of light, flying through an endless sea of stars. I'd wake from these dreams feeling happy and safe, like how I felt when Mum hugged me and stroked my hair. But other times I had nightmares. The nightmares I had during that week were the worst I ever remembered having in my life. Horrible, half-glimpsed blurs. Images I'd wake from with a scream lodged in my throat, my sweat-soaked pyjamas sticking to the skin of my back. At the time, I didn't remember the nightmares themselves, at least not completely. But every time I woke from one, I was left with the same fading image. An image of myself surrounded by thick, choking blackness, dense shadows everywhere. I couldn't see a thing, but I had the sense that I was standing at the center of a vast open space. Wind howled around me. Sounds echoed. I wanted to open my mouth and yell for help, but I couldn't bring myself to. Because I knew I wasn't alone. It was a week after Grandma's story that I used the special knock. It was a Saturday night, and my friend from school, Tim Jacobs, was round. We were having a sleepover. It's been a long, long time since I last saw Tim, but I can still picture him. Even though he was a month younger than me, I always remember him looking older, a tall, broad-shouldered kid with green eyes and messy blonde hair, a half-smirk permanently on his face. Tim was one of the most popular kids in our year, and in normal circumstances he wouldn't have had anything to do with me. But our dads were friends from way back, and we'd known each other our whole lives. As Tim often liked to remind the kids at school, he was forced to hang out with me. "When are you gonna get a TV in your room? Or a computer?" Tim sat in his pyjamas, slumped in the chair by my desk. He was fiddling with my desk lamp, switching it on and off. His face lit up with light, then disappeared, then lit up again. This wasn't the first time Tim had asked me a question like this. Whenever we had sleepovers at my house, he spent the whole time moaning about my lack of stuff. No TV, no computer, no PlayStation. I had board games, and I had books, but that was about it. And Tim had no interest in those things. "You know my mum won't let me," I muttered back. It was 10 p.m., and we were both speaking in half whispers. We'd been told to go to sleep at 9 p.m., and Mum had already been up to give us one warning for talking. I knew from past experience that one warning was all you wanted to get. Mum had a short fuse, and she wouldn't be above grounding me if I wasn't careful. I knew we were safe if we kept our voices low, though. Mum and Dad were both downstairs in the lounge, watching TV, some film. The faint, tinny sound of laughter drifted upstairs every now and then. As long as we weren't too loud, they wouldn't hear us. I glanced warily at Tim, who was still fiddling with the lamp. He was in a restless mood. He'd been silent and sullen most of the evening, rolling his eyes whenever I suggested stuff for us to do. Bad signs. From knowing him so long, I knew he could get reckless when he was bored. Reckless and mean. "You know what I think," said Tim now, keeping his eyes on the lamp. He was talking slowly and carefully, punctuating his words with a flick of the lamp switch. "What I think. Switch. Light. Is that your mum's switch? Dark. Is a bitch. Switch. Light." He put extra emphasis on bitch, severing the bad word, the adultness of it. Then he stared across the room at me, fixing his green eyes on mine. I felt my own eyes prickle, and suddenly had to fight to hold back tears. I looked away from Tim, and my eyes found the cupboard. "I know what we could do," I said suddenly. Tim followed my gaze. "I'm not playing any more of your stupid board games," he said. "That's kids' stuff." "No, this isn't board games. This is a secret, I caught myself. A secret someone showed me." "Yeah? What secret?" Tim's voice still had an edge to it, but at the same time, I could tell I'd caught his interest. This was my best tool when Tim was in a bad mood. Distraction. If I argued or disagreed with him, he'd only make fun of me more. But if I could get his mind on something else, I might be okay. So basically there's this special knock someone taught me. I said no. If I do a special knock on that cupboard door, then open it, we'll be able to see something really cool. Tim rolled his eyes. Yeah, right. No, really. A witch taught me how to do it. She cast a spell on the door. And now I can take us anywhere we want to go just by knocking on it. Tim stood up from the chair by my desk. The lamplight spilled over his face. His expression was half smirk, half scowl. That's the dumbest thing I ever heard, he said. It's dumb even for you. How about instead of knocking on the door, I knock on your head a bunch of times? How about that? He took a step towards me, and I panicked. Well, if you're too scared to try it, I'll understand. This was a big risk, and I knew it. But as soon as the words were out, Tim paused. Why the hell would I be scared? I'm not scared of nothing. I shrugged. Well, the spell the witch did is dangerous. Really dangerous. Like, if we get the number of knocks wrong, and I do more than I should, we could go someplace bad. Tim glanced across at the cupboard door, then looked back at me. His face was hard to read. Wait, so how many knocks is it meant to be then? 7, I said quickly. 7 takes us to this awesome place. But the witch told me that if we get the knocks wrong, especially if we get close to 13, or something like that, then the door opens someplace different, someplace scary. Tim was no longer scowling. He looked across at the cupboard door again, a slight frown on his face. After a few more seconds, he shrugged his shoulders. Okay, go on then. Let's try it. The brief wave of relief I felt was extinguished as soon as I turned to the cupboard door. It stood a few feet away from me, just outside the glow of the desk lamp, in the shadows. It seemed stupid to think that the cupboard wasn't anything more than just a cupboard. Baby stuff. But then again, as I looked at it, I remembered the dreams I'd been having all week. The nightmares. And Grandma's words from the previous weekend floated back to me. If you get the wrong number and then open the door. Grandma hadn't had her storytelling face on when she'd warned me about getting the number wrong. She'd had her serious face on. I was sure of it. As though she really meant what she was saying. And what was it she'd said about 13 knocks? If you do somehow knock the wrong number of times, especially if that number happens to be 13, or something close to it, then whatever you do, don't open the door. Okay, don't open it, no matter what you hear on the other side. I shivered. Still, that was all right, wasn't it? I'd just have to make sure I only knocked 7 times. I'd count as I went. Easy peasy. I pulled in a deep breath and stepped towards the cupboard. Felt Tim's eyes on me. From downstairs, at the edge of my hearing, I caught laughter floating up from the lounge. It's okay, I told myself. Your parents are just downstairs. And besides, nothing's really going to happen, is it? Grandma can't really turn doors magic. Get on with it, said Tim. If you're going to do your special needs knock, or whatever the hell it is, then do it, okay. Don't just stand there. I ignored him. By now I was directly in front of the cupboard door. I could feel that tingle again too, that pressure. Beneath my pyjamas, my skin was all goosebumps. It might only have been the slight chill in my bedroom, and nothing more than that. But then again I knew it was more than that. I could feel it in my mind, a heaviness that was like the start of a headache. A pull behind my eyes. As I reached up and made my right hand into a fist, It felt like I was no longer in control of my body. Bum. I struck the wood with my fist softly. The sound was dull and hollow. Bum. I felt Tim at the edge of my vision, moving up beside me. Bum. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a faint sound. Bum. At first, I thought it was noise from the TV downstairs, but bum. Then I thought it might be coming from outside my bedroom window, and bum. Then it sounded as though it was all around me, and bum. Finally, as my fist struck the door for the 7th time, I realized what the sound was. A whistle. A faint, low hum, coming from inside the cupboard. The echo of my final knock faded, melting into the noise beyond the door. My skin tingled. I stepped forwards, almost in a trance, my hand reaching for the doorknob. And then I felt myself shoved to one side as Tim pushed past me. Before I had a chance to stop him, or even so much as call out, Tim had thumped his fist against the door 6 more times, making the total number of knocks 13. Beyond the cupboard, the whistling sound stopped. Tim reached out and gripped the doorknob. I have always loved camping. There is something about being out in a tent away from electronics and everyday life that gives me a sort of reminder that I'm not totally dependent on civilization and phones to survive. I know that not bringing my phone is where I made my biggest mistake, but hey, it's Michigan. We don't have scaly predators here that cause me to worry, and I knew these particular woods very well. Never experienced anything bad before, so I figured it was as safe of a place to be. It was my younger brother Todd, my sister Amy and her husband Don and me. All of us agreed no phones, just tents, beer and a relaxing time away from life. Well, I thought it was going to be relaxing. You can choose to believe what you will, but this did happen, and my life is never going to be the same. We all rode together in my sister's van and parked at the site we used to party at as teenagers. Even camped here a few times, but had about 5 more people with us. The spider spot, really, Amy complained. When we first found this spot years, before there was an old stump that was littered with wolf spiders. We burned it to the ground after waking up to big nasty spiders all over us after a night of drinking. So we named it the spider spot. Come on, that stump's gone. Besides, it's only a 1/4 mile walk, and my feet have been killing me from work. Todd sighed. We all grabbed our shit and started walking the 10 to 15 minute walk, looking forward to the fire and, of course, beer. The worst part of the walk was the damn broken branches that seemed to jump out just to stab your face and break off. After we finally got there, we did the usual setting tents up and grabbed firewood so the rest of the night would be filled with beer, laughter, then bed after about 25 creepy nighttime pissing trips. It must have been around 1:30 a.m. when things started getting weird. Hey, did you guys hear that? Don asked, shushing everyone. We sat quietly, and after a few seconds heard the unmistakable sound of laughter. Just some other campers, man, probably doing the same thing we are, I answered with a laugh. Without warning, Toad shouted loudly to the people, "Got any more beer?" We all laughed and shushed him. We were having a blast and didn't think anything of it. Then we heard running. "What the hell, Todd, you pissed them off." Amy started to panic a little. "Don't worry, Amy. They are probably drunk just wanting to talk." Dawn comforted her, but you could see the worried look on his face as the footsteps got closer. My heart was beating out of my chest, thinking we were going to get into a drunken brawl. Got any more beer? It sounded like a weird recording of Todd, only different. What the fuck? All of the hair on my arms stood on end. It really creeped me out. "Very funny assholes," Todd shouted. Then more running footsteps, only this time away from our campsite. Must be drunk teenagers messing with us. Emmy breathed a sigh of relief. We all kind of nodded and agreed it was time for bed. That was kind of a buzzkill, and I think creeped us out a little. "Hey, I'm sleeping in your tent, bud," Todd said, kind of with a nervous glance around the darkness. I said with a laugh, but was secretly happy not to have to rough it out alone. Once we all were in our tents, it was very quiet. It was the only time I can remember being kind of scared. I must have dozed off, because I woke up to Todd shaking me. "Dude, listen," he whispered quietly. At first there was nothing. Then I heard the most terrifying thing I've ever heard. It sounded right outside my tent, like a foot away. "I'm sleeping in your tent tonight, Bude." Again it sounded like Todd, only not like him. I was about to shit my pants. Todd looked at me in horror, and I must have had the same look on my face, because I was petrified. Then we heard the running again, and whatever it was, it ran off again. "Let's hurry get the fuck out of here," Don shouted to my surprise. They must have been listening to whatever it was too. We all jumped out of our tents and ran back to the van as quick as possible. I've never felt more relieved to be out of the woods. This was all last weekend and is 100% true. The worst part is Todd called me and said he's been hearing something outside his house at night. He wants me to come over tonight, but I'm honestly afraid to.